welcome to the channel. Today, we have a story with unexpected twists that you won't want to miss. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin. Oregon's late summers are famously unpredictable, and this September was no exception, offering both heavy rain and an unexpected warmth. Normally, by late August, I'd be mowing the lawn, but not this year. My house has a unique feature. The backyard slopes steeply down toward a small stream nestled in the woods behind. When the house was built, the front was backfilled to level it with the road, creating a steep drop along the side of the house. This design resulted in a basement that's sealed off at the front, but opens out toward the back. It also allowed for the installation of a double-leaf service door, which has been incredibly useful for moving my lawn mower and other garden tools in and out without cluttering up the garage. It's one of the things I love most about the house. After finishing with the mower, I placed everything in its proper spot. I'm allergic to grass, so I couldn't wait to get upstairs and shower. Just as I was about to reach the top of the steps, I heard my wife's voice. I had seen her friend's car while mowing in front of the house, so it wasn't surprising to hear voices. But then, I overheard their conversation, and it made my hand hesitate as I reached for the doorknob. Allow me to introduce myself first. My name is Daniel Brown, though I go by Daniel, not Dan. Back in school, they called me Dan after Denzel Washington, though the show aired long before I was born, so it hardly counts as a pop culture reference now. I graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in accounting, and after earning my CPA in the shortest possible time, I began working at a large firm in Vancouver as a team leader specializing in audits and financial oversight. While not the most thrilling role, it pays exceptionally well, and I've had the chance to see the inner workings of many companies. I have a knack for forensic analysis, piecing together financial trails to uncover things like fraud and money laundering. I'm considered an expert and have even been called in to advise the FBI on 2 cases. My wife, Hannah, majored in political science and business, initially planning to pursue law, and we met during our freshman year. I remember sitting alone, waiting for the first day of classes, when she walked in. Hannah had a tall, slender figure, reminiscent of a ballerina, but with a little more curve. Her long auburn hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore a sundress with sandals, which emphasized her smooth, athletic legs. The perfect mix of innocence and allure was overwhelming, and I was immediately struck with intense attraction. Unfortunately, Hannah didn't sit next to me, and we weren't assigned to the same group project. It took me 4 weeks to finally gather the courage to approach her with a silly joke, which made her laugh. No polite giggle, but a full, genuine laugh. From there, we started talking, and I asked if she wanted to grab coffee after class. She smiled and said, "I've been waiting for you to ask me that for 4 weeks." The rest of college passed quickly. We were inseparable for the last 2 years, and though our parents weren't thrilled, we moved in together in our senior year. They eventually accepted our relationship as we showed how serious we were. When I graduated, I landed a lucrative job at an accounting firm in Vancouver, earning more than I could have imagined for a recent graduate. Hannah was accepted into law school at the University of Washington, and we stayed in our student apartment. My company offered to pay for my MBA, so I took evening classes. I didn't need a car because I used Sound Transit for my commute, which helped save on costs. 3 years later, Hannah graduated, and I proposed during a birthday dinner at the Met Grill in downtown Vancouver. 6 months later, we got married. She took a position as a deputy district attorney in King County, and we decided to buy a house in Bellevue close to her parents. The house was perfect for us, a 3-bedroom starter home. One room was set up as an office where I worked from time to time, and another was a guest room. The last room, naturally, became our master bedroom. Hannah even convinced me that the 3rd bedroom could be used for a nanny once we had kids. I was an only child and always longed for siblings. Since freshman year, Hannah and I had discussed having children, agreeing to wait until she was settled in her career before we started trying. But now, we had reached that moment, and just 2 nights ago, we decided to stop taking Hannah's birth control and begin trying for a baby. I had never been happier. Then I overheard something that made my hand freeze on the doorknob. Daniel and I decided it's time for me to get pregnant, Hannah announced with excitement. Her friend, Chloe Harris, was delighted by the news. Both women made the same high-pitched sound, a mix of excitement that reminded me of whales beaching themselves on the Oregon coast. Standing there, I smiled at their joy, which matched my own at the thought of becoming a father. But as I reached for the doorknob again, I heard a question that wiped the smile from my face. "This is wonderful, Hannah," Chloe said. "But what about Tom, the florist?" Hannah responded calmly. "Daniel is outside mowing the lawn." There was a pause, and I could almost feel Chloe's gaze searching the room, waiting for me to appear. Then Hannah spoke again. "I already told Tom that I'm ending the affair. He didn't mind. After Peterson steps down as senator, Tom thinks he has a real chance." Chloe's voice turned serious. "Getting caught having an affair with a married employee would be very unpleasant. It's that simple." In 3 short sentences, my world collapsed. Tom Roberts, Hannah's boss at the DA's office, was a widower in his 40s. His wife, Rebecca, had died from breast cancer, leaving him to raise their daughter, Emily. He was ambitious and politically savvy, maneuvering within his party for a chance at higher office. Now, I understood how my wife had access to all that sensitive information. "Is it true?" Chloe asked bluntly. "You've been hot and serious for 6 months, and now you're just going to give it up?" The teasing doubt in her voice made my blood boil. I knew Chloe from the University of Washington, and I had always thought of her as my friend too. But now, I realized how wrong I had been about that. Stop it," Hannah protested, her voice tinged with laughter. "You're so bad. Tom's a great lover, but he was just rough to play with. I love Daniel, but Tom just took me and used me the way he wanted. No love, just power. But now that Daniel and I are having a baby, I don't want to take any chances. I love Daniel, and I will be a good and faithful mother." I couldn't help but think, how many more cliches could she possibly spew? All I needed to be completely devastated was to come home, find an unfamiliar car in the driveway, and discover them in my bed. The thought alone made me want to burst into the room and tear everything apart. But I was frozen, unable to move. My heart hammered in my chest. "So, cold turkey?" Chloe asked again, her words dripping with amusement, followed by Hannah's giggle. "Well, not cold turkey," Hannah admitted. "Next week, I have a conference with Tom in Vancouver. We'll have our farewell party there. They'll miss the sex, but Daniel and the baby are more important." I couldn't bear to hear more, but I didn't know what to do. I loved Hannah, but this was destroying me. I took a deep breath. My business training kicked in. I needed to step back and think. I made my way up the stairs, almost stomping as if I were climbing a mountain, and entered the kitchen. Hannah and Chloe were sitting with cups of tea in front of them. Was there a hint of guilt on Hannah's face? "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, concern in her voice. I realized my cheeks were wet with tears. "Allergies," I muttered. "It's going to be a bad spring." "Well, go upstairs and take a shower," Hannah suggested. "Just throw those clothes in the bathroom, and I'll wash them so they don't mess up your closet. I bought you a new package of Claritin D last week. It's in the medicine cabinet." "Thank you," I managed to say, heading toward the stairs. I needed time to think. The next morning, Thursday, I used an early meeting as an excuse to leave before Hannah woke up. The night before, I had used my allergies as an excuse to go to bed early because I was emotionally wrecked. On the train, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my mind. On one hand, my wife had been unfaithful, but it seemed to have been purely sexual. She intended to stay with me and raise our child. Some might say I should accept it, be happy that my wife was coming back to the marriage and planning to be a good wife and mother. But could I really live with that? However, a voice in my head kept saying, if she did it once, what would stop her from doing it again? 10 years from now, when the kids are in school, would she have another, just sex affair? And then divorce, with the kids most likely going to her, while I'd be left with a massive child support bill. As an accountant and business analyst, I'm accustomed to thinking in terms of risk and reward. And that's exactly what I found myself doing here. My trust in my wife was shattered. The just sex excuse misses the point entirely. The real issue here is the complete lack of respect for the partner. A cheater knows that what they are doing is wrong, and they know they're hurting the other person. Otherwise, they would have been open about it from the start. Don't get me wrong, I don't think I could ever come to terms with her sleeping with Tom. But at least if she had talked to me about it, there would have been some respect shown. Hannah's actions made me realize just how little respect she had for me. I was working, but part of my mind was consumed with thoughts of what I should be doing. I had no solid evidence beyond the overheard conversation. Over the past 6 months, during which this affair supposedly continued, I hadn't noticed any changes in her behavior. Confronting her directly without any proof would be high risk and offer little reward. Hannah would deny everything, and Tom Roberts would do the same. Taking the issue to court would be financial suicide. Every judge, lawyer, and politician in this area knew Williams, and I'd be buried in paperwork just to keep his name clean. I considered just leaving, starting over somewhere else. The thought was tempting, but the house felt like an anchor. Hannah couldn't afford it on her own, and we had very little equity. She'd have to sell it quickly to avoid foreclosure, and in this market, that was highly unlikely. It would ruin both my credit and hers. As a CPA, having bad credit is a death sentence when looking for a new position. Who could trust me with their finances if I couldn't even manage my own? I needed proof before making any decisions. I wouldn't do anything without it. And then, the evidence came from the most unexpected source. 3 days later, despite my efforts to keep myself under control, I still hadn't found anything to back up what I had heard. Her personal laptop was clean, no secret email accounts. No sexy lingerie hidden in the back of the closet. No receipts from places she shouldn't have been. Absolutely nothing. Then Hannah called me at work and told me we were invited to a political announcement party at Tom Roberts' house on Friday night. I assumed it was for his big announcement, probably for a U.S. Senate candidacy. I was still clinging to the hope of some kind of revelation, but I had no concrete proof. We arrived just in time for the event. Williams had a large mansion near Hood River, with a small horse farm in the backyard. A huge tent was set up to accommodate all the guests. When we walked in, there stood the bastard himself, Tom Roberts, at the head of the reception line, looking like a king. As a widower, he didn't have a wife to play hostess, but he had clearly recruited his 21-year-old daughter to take on that role. She greeted the guests as if it was second nature to her. When it was our turn, Williams smiled broadly at Hannah and said, "Hannah, you did it. How wonderful." He kissed my wife lightly on the cheek. Then he turned to me. "Daniel, it's great to see you again. I'd be lost without your wife, but I understand I'll soon have to give her up when you start expanding your family," he said, laughing at his own joke. "Just let me take her when you're done with her, and there won't be any hard feelings." Hannah even blushed a little, and I wanted to strangle this grinning fool. I understood his implied meaning, though it was clear he thought it went over my head. Who knows what the future will bring? I said flatly, neutral but far from friendly. I reported my audit findings in the same tone. Williams blushed slightly, and Hannah elbowed me, muttering something about me being rude. Williams smoothly moved on to the next guest, leaving us alone with his daughter. Hannah was incredibly attractive, but Emily Roberts was stunning. Even in my inner rage, I couldn't help but notice. With auburn hair and a brilliant smile, she reminded me of a young Maureen O'Hara. If Hannah had the look of a busted ballerina, Emily looked like she belonged on the cover of a swimsuit calendar next to someone like Kate Upton. Emily had the perfect combination of beauty, health, and photogenic features. Everything photographers dream of, but often have to use Photoshop to achieve. Tom Roberts had the perfect political family, a triple threat. He appeared to be the perfect candidate for the role of wise statesman and devoted family man. His wife's death from cancer seemed to have left him with the ideal image of a grieving widower. She was idolized, and any political opponent who dared attack her would be signing their own career's death sentence. His daughter, Emily, was the picture of a princess, the prom queen, a University of Washington business and law major, a former gymnast, and now a cheerleader at the same university. According to Hannah, Emily was planning to try out for the Seahawks cheerleading squad at the next open competition, having just turned 21. With a saintly late wife and a smart, photogenic daughter, the press would be all over him on the campaign trail. "Daniel," Emily said, her voice full of excitement, as she gave me a tight hug. This wasn't the typical polite party hug. It was a full-body compression, with parts of her pressed against me in the most unexpectedly pleasant way. "You look great. No wonder Hannah kept you hidden away. You never come to any of our parties. You work too much. It's bad for your health," she said all in one breath. My mood shifted instantly from anger to shock. I muttered a few polite words about how beautiful she looked. Then I was about to step away when two thoughts struck me. First, Emily hadn't greeted Hannah at all. And second, what kind of parties was she referring to? Before I could ask, Hannah rushed over to greet the young woman, leaving me no room for further questions. We were forced to give way to the next group of guests. As we mingled, I couldn't shake the thoughts from my mind. After pouring a drink for Hannah, I asked, "What parties is Emily talking about?" Hannah just smiled dismissively and snorted. "She's just teasing, little brat. Tom sometimes holds team meetings and strategy sessions here. He says he thinks better with a drink in his hand and at a bar. You never know who might be in the next booth. She's been here several times when her classes were canceled. Don't tell anyone, but Tom used to let her drink here before she turned 21. That got me thinking, so this bastard had been sleeping with my wife right here in his home, under the guise of team meetings. These meetings could have been legitimate, but it seemed more likely that Hannah was always the last to leave. Or maybe she left first and came back after everyone else had gone, so no one would wonder why she was always cleaning up after their meetings. With his wife gone and his daughter away at college, Tom didn't need to find a secluded hotel room. There was no record of their meetings, no trail to follow. "So, Barbara attends your team meetings?" I asked casually. Hannah brushed it off with a wave. "No, she was here a few times when her classes were canceled. She's just teasing her dad about partying during work hours," she said, pulling my hand. "Come on, honey, buy your young wife a drink." For the next hour, Hannah stayed by my side. We spoke to some of her colleagues, and several people brought up our plans to have a baby, saying how sad they'd be to lose Hannah for a while, but how happy they were for us. To be honest, I was a little embarrassed. How did everyone know about our plans? An hour later, Tom Roberts called for everyone's attention. His daughter stood smiling beside him. He began by thanking everyone for coming and then launched into the announcement of his big campaign. It wasn't surprising, but it still created a buzz among the crowd. I noticed the local newspaper publisher and one of his reporters nearby, taking notes. There was no doubt that this would make it into tomorrow's paper. I won't bore you with the rest of the party details. It might have been a pleasant time if my heart hadn't been in pieces and my mind wasn't racing, constantly trying to find proof of everything. About an hour and a half after the big announcement, Margaret Wilkins, the first assistant district attorney, entered and announced that Tom wanted to meet with his staff. Though Tom was an elected official, Margaret, a senior manager, essentially ran the office. Prosecutors came and went every 4 years, but Margaret was the constant. Margaret was a tough, respected woman, admired for her honesty and integrity in the legal community. She was the main reason Hannah took the position, and I liked her too. Margaret had been married for over 30 years to an electrician who had put her through college. Now he owned a large electrical contracting company. The two were completely devoted to each other. I always viewed them as role models for both Hannah and me. "Sorry for stealing your wife, Daniel," Margaret said with a chuckle. "Tom wants to discuss the organization of the office as he starts his campaign." A moment later, they both left. I moved away from the small gathering of spouses still lingering at the meeting and made my way to the other side of the large pool, which was located across from the patio where the party was taking place. There, hanging on chains, was a wicker swing chair tucked into the shadows. People could see me if they looked, but I wouldn't be obvious. It was the perfect place for me to collect my thoughts in solitude. I hadn't been sitting there for even 5 minutes when a voice suddenly broke the quiet. "So, this is where you're hiding," the voice purred. I looked up and saw Emily slipping into the wicker swing beside me. She positioned herself so that she was sitting facing me, her small black dress draped over her tanned hips, hugging her body in a way that hinted at what lay underneath without revealing anything. The combination of seductive and innocent was striking, and it says something about my state of mind that I noted this almost academically. "You look like someone with the weight of the world on his shoulders," she remarked. I didn't really want to talk about my troubles with the daughter of my wife's lover, no matter how attractive she was. "We've been busy at the office, lots of audits going on," I responded, hoping to end the conversation. "Is that true?" Emily asked with interest. "I just finished my last accounting course at university. We had a whole section on forensic accounting for law enforcement. I found it really exciting. Her comment caught me off guard. "Is it true?" I asked incredulously. She smiled, clearly enjoying my surprise. "Well, it's not glamorous or anything, but it really is like a detective's job. You gather all the pieces of information from a bunch of other facts and put them together to see the full picture. And since some people try to hide things, it makes it even more challenging. Most people don't think of it that way," I admitted. Emily went on, detailing what she'd learned in her class and why she enjoyed it so much. I must admit, I was impressed. "I've had interns at firms who couldn't speak this well on the topic," I noted, focusing on her words. This helped me push aside both her appearance and the anger simmering inside me. For a while, I felt like I was in the role of a mentor, and that helped distract me from the emotional turmoil. "You really like the course," I said. "It sounds like you've mastered the topic pretty well." Emily blushed slightly at my praise, and for a moment, the image of the flirtatious young woman disappeared, replaced by a sweet girl who was genuinely touched by my simple compliment. "I really thought about joining the FBI when I finished school," she admitted. "But Dad wants me to either become a prosecutor or work for one of his friend's law firms. I'm not sure that's what I want to do." "You should follow your own dreams, not your father's," I said honestly. Not that I was opposed to ruining that bastard's plans. I'd done some work with the FBI when audits uncovered criminal activity. Sharp people, those agents. Before Emily could reply, Hannah emerged from the shadows. "That's where you disappeared to," she said teasingly. "You didn't do anything indecent, did you?" Emily turned to face my wife, smiling brightly. "We were just talking about Daniel's work. We were just discussing it in class," Emily added. I wanted to get an expert's opinion. "Well, Daniel is like that," Hannah said proudly. I looked over one of his audit reports where an employee embezzled money using his boss's login. Daniel noticed that some of the transfers took place while the guy was away on a business trip, but the login was done from the corporate office. Most of us would have stopped when we identified the boss. Daniel kept digging. I could have gotten a conviction against that employee the first day out of law school. Daniel left the prosecutors with nothing to do in that case. Hannah looked at me with a proud expression on her face as she told this little story, and I found myself confused. How could she be proud of me and claim to love me while she was in a 6-month relationship with her damn boss? A flicker of confusion must have crossed my face because Hannah asked, "What's wrong, dear?" "Nothing," I replied quickly. "Just thinking about something." "Well, stop it. It's a party," Hannah scolded, barely catching her breath. "And Daniel, you will never guess what opportunity one was offered. Tom and Margaret want me to do some administrative work before I go on maternity leave, so there won't be any loose ends when I leave. I'll work directly with Margaret." My heart skipped a beat at the thought of Hannah being away from that bastard Tom, but a second later, my hopes were dashed. "They'll have to travel sometimes," Hannah continued. "They'll be delivering important papers to Tom during the campaign. So, I won't be involved in his campaign, but I'll still get to see some of the behind-the-scenes action. This will be so much fun." I felt my heart crack again. I had heard Hannah say she planned to end the affair, so we could have a baby, but now I could easily imagine her being unfaithful again while on the campaign trail. And if she got pregnant, how could I be sure the child would be mine? Tom and I were roughly the same size and complexion. Without a DNA test, it would be nearly impossible to tell. My anger flared, but I forced myself to keep it under control. Now was not the time. Emily and Hannah soon became engrossed in a conversation about Emily's new position and the campaign. I was forgotten in the midst of their chatter. I took this opportunity to pull myself together. After night, we'd start planning. I had to find a way to counteract Tom's political influence, but to be honest, I had no idea where to begin. 2 days later, the answer came to my office. "Your meeting for 4 is here," my assistant called through the open door. I checked my Outlook calendar, but I didn't have anything scheduled. Before I could respond, the door opened, and in walked Emily Roberts. "Hey, Daniel," she greeted, her long auburn hair cascading over her shoulders. She wore a light sundress that showed off her gorgeous legs, paired with strappy sandals that hugged her calves up to her knees. Her modestly covered breasts didn't reveal any cleavage, but the fabric pressed against her chest in a way that left little to the imagination. 2 thin straps held the dress up, leaving her arms bare. I was momentarily speechless as I watched her enter. "I hope you don't mind," Emily began, closing my office door behind her. I told Mary that we had a meeting to discuss my career and how Hannah is working for my father. I politely rose from my chair. "I'm glad to see you," I said. "Just working on some reports." I motioned for her to sit in one of the chairs in front of my desk. After she settled into the chair, I sat back down. "What did you want to talk about?" The happy expression on Emily's face vanished. "I think you know Daniel," she said, her voice becoming serious. "I saw it in your face when you talked to my father." I stared at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" I asked cautiously. Emily's voice dropped lower. "This bastard, my father. He's having an affair with your wife." I leaned back in my chair, stunned by the bluntness of her words. "Did you just find out?" I asked, my mind racing. Emily nodded. "About 3 months ago," she said softly. "I'm sorry. How did you find out?" I asked, struggling to keep my composure. Emily took a deep breath. "One Friday, I came home early. They were having one of their meetings at our house. I had lunch plans with a friend, but when she canceled, I went back home. Dad asked when I'd be home, and I told him after dinner. But when I went inside, I found them in the jacuzzi having sex. I took pictures and I even filmed them running naked into the house. There was a foot of snow on the ground. I was shocked. "You took pictures of your father having sex?" I asked, almost unable to believe it. Then another thought crossed my mind. Could I get copies of those photos? It could help in a divorce. As if reading my mind, Emily reached into her bag, pulled out a large envelope, and placed it on my desk. "Here are the photos from that day, and several others," she said. She paused before grinning. "Dad installed a security system in the house. The entire exterior is covered, and several rooms inside have cameras. If you know the site, the key fob, and the password, you can access the footage from almost anywhere. There's a flash drive with the videos." I was speechless. Tom's own daughter had just handed me everything I could possibly need to destroy him and win a divorce. "Why?" I finally asked, still in shock. A sad expression crossed Emily's face, then quickly turned to anger. "Because he's a bastard," she said quietly. "I hate him more than you could ever imagine." I didn't speak right away, instead waiting for her to continue. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice softening. "Mom met Dad when she was a college student. He was an aspiring lawyer, working in the sex crimes unit in Vancouver. Mom came here from Ireland after her family died in the Londonderry bombing. She was trying to escape the chaos. Mom was dating some loser who beat her so badly, she ended up in intensive care. Dad took on her case, and that's when they met. The loser went to jail, and a year later, they got married." She sighed before continuing. "Dad was always ambitious. He got a smart, beautiful woman with an exotic accent, and Mom got a strong man who would protect her. But now," Emily trailed off, her face hardening again. "Now he's nothing more than a bastard. A few years later, I came into the picture. My father, ever the ambitious man, wanted me to pursue gymnastics, thinking that having a daughter competing in the Olympics would be a great asset to his political career. Do you know how most gymnast careers end?" Emily asked, her voice a little cynical. I shook my head. Emily smiled slightly. "They call it the 3BS. Boobs, butts, and boys. I got the first two," she continued. "Eventually, my father shifted gears, encouraging me to join cheerleading and become an All-American girl. I didn't mind it at first. I loved performing. But by the time I turned 16, I realized I was merely a pawn in his grand ambitions. My mother, on the other hand, had known about my father's affairs almost from the start. He'd had them nearly as soon as they were married. She knew and begged him to stop, but she was too weak to do anything about it. Trapped in her situation, she couldn't leave him, and divorce was out of the question, given her deep Catholic faith." Emily paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. "Sometimes I wonder if her poor response to cancer treatment was her unconscious way of wanting to die, or perhaps even sabotaging her treatment. But anyway, I was with her in the hospital when she passed away. The official story was that my father had taken the case to court and won, changing the time of her death. In reality, he was in bed with his assistant, celebrating with her. He treated my mother like a trophy for the press, and they lapped up the story of how the heroic prosecutor saved the abused woman. It made him look like a saint, but the truth was, he was the one who had beaten her more than once, and I witnessed it. Why are you telling me all this? I asked, my voice strained with confusion. Because you don't deserve it, Daniel, Emily replied, her voice almost too calm. My father's not a good man. After Mom died, he hid his affairs while I was in college. Once I left, he started organizing meetings at the house, not just for his work, but also for his charity groups. And I know for sure that he sleeps with at least 2 other women from those groups. One of them actually thinks it's true love and is planning to leave her husband. My stomach churned as I processed her words. Is that what Hannah is planning to do? I asked, the pieces starting to fall into place. Emily shook her head. No, she thinks it's just fun. They say power is the greatest aphrodisiac. Hannah seems to be proof of that. I recalled overhearing a conversation between my wife and my father about some senator they were meeting with. My mind was racing. So, what do you want? I asked, my curiosity piqued despite myself. To her credit, Emily looked me straight in the eye and answered without hesitation. I want you to get out of your marriage with this traitor. I want my father's career to be destroyed to the point where he couldn't get elected dog catcher in a town full of cats. She paused, and for a brief moment, I saw her eyes flash with a kind of cold determination. I thought about just sending the photos to the newspapers or even to the other party. But he has too many friends. I believe we can make him pay, together. I raised an eyebrow, considering her proposition. Won't it be harder for you to finish school if you get involved in this? She tossed her auburn hair over her shoulder, unfazed. No, my mother left me her inheritance in a trust fund. I haven't touched it, but if it comes down to it, I could pay for the rest of my tuition and still have plenty left over. Why didn't your mother just take you and leave? I asked. She could have gone back to Ireland, where your father wouldn't be able to reach her. Emily winced at my words. She was Irish Catholic. Divorce wasn't an option, no matter what. She held on to her faith until the end. And that's the only reason I don't think her death was intentional. Catholics believe suicide is an unforgivable sin. I paused, taking in the depth of her bitterness and pain. It was clear she wanted revenge, and I could understand why. But her anger wasn't a trap. At least not for me. She had everything to gain, and I had nothing to lose. After all, if Tom and Hannah were trying to ruin me, they could do it openly in court. This subtle cruelty, this scheming was the work of someone who had already been broken, just like me. A plan began to form in my mind, and I realized I would need Emily's help to pull it off. If nothing else, it would show me just how far she was willing to go to destroy her father. All right, I said, after a long pause. But I don't want to destroy him by publishing these pictures or even mentioning him in the divorce. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Why not? She demanded, her face flushing with frustration. I held up a hand to stop her. I didn't say we wouldn't destroy him. I just don't want to deal with the fallout from a scandal. A cuckolded husband in the midst of a political scandal won't do anyone any favors. Instead, I want to ruin what he's worked for his entire life, his power and influence. And then I can have a quiet divorce, free from all the unwanted attention. Emily's face turned from shock to something more calculating. After a minute, a sly grin tugged at the corners of her mouth. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. I returned her grin, the wheels turning in my head. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. I'm going to do what I do best, I said with determination. Give me his financial documents, personal and campaign related. They brought down Capone through tax evasion. Emily, after meeting her father, had no doubt she'd be able to find something. And if I can't, she asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. I smiled, my plan already forming. I could do one more thing. For the next 3 days, Emily and I worked tirelessly. She installed a keystroke recorder on her father's personal laptop and home computer, making sure to cover every base. She also took a full backup of his hard drive, just in case. Then we set up a security system that uploaded all of their records to a cloud server, one that I had access to and that was physically located abroad out of reach. As for me, I avoided any unnecessary complications. I didn't bother eavesdropping on Hannah's phone calls, though I knew exactly where to focus my attention. Thanks to the evidence Emily provided, I was already well on my way. I also activated a GPS tracker, one designed for parents keeping tabs on their children. It wasn't sophisticated, just a simple system using cell towers to determine location unless I sent a command to turn on the GPS. I didn't want Hannah to find me at home while I was working on all of this, so I faked a groin injury. It gave me the perfect excuse to avoid sex with my wife. After all the discoveries I'd made about Tom's numerous affairs, I didn't want to take any more risks. Plus, I was scheduling a doctor's appointment for an STD test, just to be sure. Nothing came back positive at first, but I knew from experience that certain infections, like HIV, could take months to show up in tests. Hannah, however, was more than excited to leave for Vancouver. She had planned to meet Tom there, of course, and I was far from surprised by how eagerly she anticipated the trip. But deep down, my heart was conflicted. Despite everything, I still loved her. The trust, however, was gone, irrevocably broken. It was Thursday morning when Hannah, her bag packed, came up to me. She was about to leave for the conference with Tom and a junior lawyer from their office. The poor guy who had no idea he was just a cover for their affair. "We'll be home Sunday afternoon," she said, her voice light and carefree as she dropped her bag at the door. I sat at the table, my back to her, sipping my coffee. She wrapped her arms around me and leaned down until her lips brushed against my ear. "I hope you feel better so we can start taking care of the baby," she whispered. Her voice was full of warmth, and her scent was intoxicating. It took me back to more innocent times. I wanted to cry in that moment, but managed to hold myself together. "They'll apply ice to help it heal," I murmured, stroking her hand gently and kissing her forehead. "I'll be fine." Her voice was filled with a soft moan. "I wish I didn't have to go. It would be so much better to just stay here with you naked all weekend. You can always tell Williams that something more important has come up," I replied, almost absent-mindedly. She looked at me, surprised by my tone. Something in it must have caught her attention. "What's your problem with Tom?" she asked, her expression incredulous. "You were rude to him at the party, and now you're acting like you hate him." I forced myself to calm down, shrugging nonchalantly. "Honestly, I've seen too many arrogant, hot-headed jerks like Williams. They think they're untouchable, like they're the epitome of power. But in reality, they're just big fish in a small pond. They sell people the illusion of power, and people buy into it. Like that mayor in South Carolina last year. He embezzled millions from the city while sleeping with 3 married women. Now he's serving 10 years in federal prison, and all those women are divorced and publicly humiliated. Williams is cut from the same cloth." Hannah's eyes widened with shock. She'd heard me rant about people like Williams before, but she had never associated him with the kind of corrupt individuals I described. "I probably shouldn't have said that," I admitted, but it felt good to get it off my chest. "But honestly, I'm just saying, if Williams gets to Washington within a week, he'll be seducing clueless interns. And when it all falls apart, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near him." Hannah looked at me with a mixture of confusion and disbelief, clearly taken aback. She probably didn't expect me to be so blunt about Tom, but she needed to hear it. "Daniel, that's awful what you said about Tom," she protested, her voice full of defense. "He's a good person. He's done so much for the people in this district. He's not like that." I could hear the desperation in her voice, a hint of pleading as she denied the truth I was laying out before her. But before I could respond, the sound of a car horn echoed from outside. Tom had arrived. Hannah let out a frustrated sigh, her face falling. She looked at me with a mixture of regret and fear, and I could see that she understood exactly what I meant. But it was too late now. The damage had already been done. "They'll be home in 4 days, Hannah said, trying to sound soothing. "We can talk about it then. But get ready, love. We have a child to start with." She wrapped her arms around me, pressing a passionate kiss to my lips, which I returned with equal fervor. "Have a nice week," she whispered. "I love you. I love you too," I replied, my words full of a hollow sincerity I wasn't sure she could detect. She grabbed her bag and opened the front door. "Bye, dear," she called as she stepped outside. "Goodbye, Hannah," I said, watching her leave before quietly closing the door behind me. 30 minutes later, I boarded a train headed to the city. Emily and I had an appointment with the FBI, and I found that I didn't need to prepare any further evidence. As it turned out, Tom Roberts was moderately skilled in his embezzlement. Emily and I met at her off-campus apartment to go over the documents she had extracted from his computer. The methods he used were fairly standard, though. I estimated that he had about $2 million hidden in an offshore account. At least that's how much he had transferred into it. I couldn't be sure it was still there, though, since those records were conveniently missing. Most of the money had come from a variety of small donors, individuals who were unlikely to raise suspicion from the IRS. But the question remained, why were people from out of state donating to the DA's campaign? After some digging, I was able to trace several of them to defendants whose cases were mysteriously dismissed or resolved with unusually lenient plea agreements. That alone was enough to raise red flags. However, it was Emily who uncovered the biggest bombshell. Turns out, she wasn't his only child. Along the way, Williams had fathered 2 more children. One was born 3 years before his wife's death, and his mother had been one of his employees at the time. The third child, born 8 months after his wife passed, was the product of a young volunteer at the hospital where his wife had been treated. Williams had provided each of these women with $4,000 a month in campaign contributions, conveniently labeled as political research consultants. Emily was furious. Her red hair seemed to reflect the fire in her eyes, and she nearly destroyed her apartment in her rage. By the time Hannah and Tom left for Vancouver, we had already gone through everything in Tom's notes. We still had questions, but our resources were limited, and we couldn't dig any deeper without more information. I wrote everything down and arranged a meeting with Gary, the senior FBI agent I worked with in the Vancouver office. Emily came up with a story for him. She told him that after taking a forensic accounting course, she became curious and decided to look at her father's notes. When she found some discrepancies, she called me because my wife worked for her and knew about my experience in these matters. Gary was a seasoned professional. He could tell there was more to the story, but we had delivered him a neatly wrapped gift, so he didn't press further. After all, this was a dirty prosecutor in his own backyard. A prosecutor who had just launched a campaign for the U.S. Senate. The kind of case that felt like manna from heaven. We caught a taxi to Emily's apartment, as she had a late class. I walked to the 30th Street station to catch the train home. As I sat on the train, I began to contemplate the next steps. I had already decided. When Hannah returned, I was packing my things and leaving. Gary promised to expedite the case and hoped to have Williams' documents subpoenaed by Wednesday. It was unlikely that much time would pass before word of the investigation got out. When that happened, Tom would realize just how illusory his power really was. As I sat on the train, Hannah called. She told me she had called early because they were going to have a big dinner, and she wouldn't be back to her room until late. I had no illusions about her intentions for the night. I gave a vague response, telling her everything was fine. She caught the distraction in my voice and asked what was wrong. I just had a meeting with some FBI agents about something. I told her, I'm on the train right now, and the investigation is still ongoing, so I can't talk about it. Oh, you're no fun, she pouted. Don't worry, love. Your secret is safe with me. We said our goodbyes, and the call ended. When I got home, I was struck by the strange, surreal feeling that washed over me. My marriage was over. We had dated, married, and spent 10 years together. Yet now I was about to become single again. I never expected this, but it was happening. I sank onto the couch, waiting for the day to pass. I didn't feel like doing anything. I just sat there, watching the sun slowly set, feeling as though I were watching my life slip away with it. Hours passed before I finally moved again, the self-pity finally lifting. It was midday on Saturday when I pulled myself out of the funk. I won't say I didn't deserve some time to wallow, but I knew it was time to do something about it. Ironically, I was mowing the lawn when I noticed a BMW convertible pull into my driveway. I stopped the mower and watched as Emily stepped out of the car. The first thing I noticed was Emily's long, pale legs stretching out from the driver's side of the BMW. She wore sandals with thin cords that wrapped around her calves, a look that always reminded me of the ancient Greeks. As she stepped out of the car, her sculpted legs flexed with the strength hidden beneath her firm skin. She wore a toga-like dress, pure white and flowing, ending mid-thigh. A delicate lace trim, about 5 centimeters in length, adorned the bottom, subtly revealing the upper part of her thighs. The fabric was light, silky, and hugged her curves in a way that made the dress seem semi-sheer, giving a glimpse of her bikini top beneath. Her arms were bare, with only a few light freckles scattered across her upper arms and shoulders. One side of the dress hung off her shoulder, leaving the other bare. Her long red hair cascaded in soft waves down her back, falling onto the same exposed shoulder. But it was her gray-green eyes and the smile she wore that truly caught my attention as she approached. I turned off the engine and greeted her. "Well, you look better than I expected," Emily said with a smirk. "I half expected to have to rescue you from a bottle or a ledge." I laughed softly. Last night I had a lot of thoughts about both options. "We had to do this," I said. "Besides, it distracts me." "Have you met with a lawyer?" she asked. I shrugged. "I did on Thursday before they left." "The documents will be ready by Monday?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. I agreed to audit a client in Austin and leave on Thursday. Usually I'm there for 3 days, then I work remotely until the report is done. This time, though, I'll be there for all 3 weeks. I shrugged again, feeling the weight of the situation. Probably a coward's way out, but I don't want to be here when everything starts brewing. I saw agreement in Emily's expression. She understood the potential fallout, how this would draw attention to her as the daughter of that bastard. "I'm glad you're thinking ahead," she said, her smile widening. "But I realized that this is what you're good at." The look in her eyes was playful, yet sincere. "Now I can plan too." "All right," she said, her tone shifting to one of determination. "Here's my plan. I'll help you finish up here, and then you'll come to me. We'll have some fun, and you can even check me out in that swimsuit I promised." "Barbara, I'm still married," I protested. "I don't think I'll be ready for anything for a while." "You need to let off some steam before you explode," she insisted, her voice a little too seductive. "Besides, you know the saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander." Her playful, sly gaze was impossible to resist. I laughed despite myself. In a bizarre twist of fate, we ran into Chloe after I finished with my yard work. I cleaned up, and we went for a late lunch at a nice restaurant. While I wasn't in the mood for any sort of revenge sex, getting out of the house with someone as sweet and witty as Emily wasn't the worst idea. As we approached the restaurant, I saw a familiar car parked outside. Chloe's car. My heart skipped a beat, and I almost told Emily to turn around. But then something inside me snapped, and I did something completely out of character. Without another thought, I casually hugged Emily and led her inside the restaurant. I had no real plan, but my mind was racing. I tipped the owner generously to seat us at a particular table, one that was somewhat obscured, but still visible from the hallway near the restroom. I sat Emily facing outward, then sat beside her. She smiled when I took her hand. "Why did it happen?" she asked sweetly. "Not that I'm complaining." I chuckled. "Do you remember how I found out about my wife's betrayal? About her friend, Chloe?" I nodded toward the parking lot. "Well, her car is parked right outside." Emily burst into a throaty laugh. "So, I'm the other woman?" "Oh, I can live with that," she said, leaning in to kiss me softly on the lips. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but rather one that hinted at what might come later, a lover's kiss, full of promises. We settled into our meal, and I found myself enjoying the moment, forgetting about all the tricks and schemes as I lost myself in Emily's company. Her sense of humor had me in stitches, especially when she made even the simplest things sound so mischievous. I happened to glance over my shoulder, and to my surprise, I saw Chloe walking past our table. I pointed it out to Emily. "Oh my God," she giggled. "I've been waiting for this." With a mischievous grin, she leaned forward to kiss me again. As her lips met mine, my hand slid under the table, resting on her leg. The skin of her thighs was soft yet firm, and the muscles beneath were tantalizingly elastic. The touch was electrifying. I was so lost in the sensation that I didn't hear Chloe's voice until it cut through the air like a knife. "Daniel, what the hell are you doing?" she shouted. "Who is this slut? Running away from your wife while she's out of town? I thought better of you." I had no doubt the entire restaurant heard her. I pulled away from Emily and turned to face my ex-girlfriend, the chaos of the situation crashing over me. "What's your problem, Chloe?" I asked, my voice casual. It's just a little carefree sex before Hannah and I settle down and have a baby. And could you keep it down? People are trying to eat." Chloe stared at me, as if I'd just slapped her with a dead fish. "What?" she stammered, clearly taken aback. I leaned back in my chair, a smirk forming on my lips. "Oh, come on, Chloe. Hannah does the same thing. I'm sure she's having a good time with her boss right now. And it's been going on for several months. So I figured, it's only fair that I seduce the boss's daughter." Chloe looked like she was about to have a heart attack. I felt Emily's soft giggle, and I gently squeezed her hand to keep her quiet. "You know about it?" Chloe finally managed, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "I know I've been the faithful, ignorant husband while my wife has been running around with a woman I considered a close friend," I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. Chloe went pale, her expression shifting from confusion to a kind of defeated realization. "Go away, Chloe," I said, my tone final. She turned and ran out of the restaurant, clearly too shaken to say anything more. A few minutes later, the sound of Chloe storming out echoed through the restaurant. Emily couldn't help but laugh lightly. "Well, that was fun while it lasted," she said with a smile. I leaned back in my chair, amused. I really wanted her to stay longer, I admitted. Her smile made me blush a little. "You know," she added, her voice playful, "she's probably on the phone with your wife right now." "Maybe," I replied with a shrug. I give her 5 minutes before my phone rings off the hook. However, if she leaves now, it's a 5-hour drive back to Vancouver. Emily laughed again, her eyes sparkling. "Well, that gives us time for dessert at least, and enough time for you to head home and pack your things." I sighed, feeling the weight of everything. "It's a shame I won't get to see you in that bikini like you promised." "Maybe next time," she teased, her fingers tugging at my shirt, pulling me closer. She whispered in my ear, "My semester ends in a week and a half." I always wanted to see Austin. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a call from Hannah, which I ignored. She had been calling for the past 10 minutes, leaving a string of furious messages. It almost made me laugh. After an hour of her calls and texts, I decided to block her number. I knew she'd eventually call from another phone, but with her driving back from Vancouver, she wouldn't have many options. When I got home, I packed all my personal belongings, not just the things I needed for my trip to Austin. I had the time, so I figured I might as well be thorough. For hours, I moved my things out of the house, unsure if I'd ever return. I booked a hotel room near the Vancouver airport and put most of my things in storage for now. I spoke to Emily a few times during this, and she mentioned that her father was now leaving angry messages on her phone. I also moved my flight to Austin a day earlier. By Monday morning, I was ready to leave. In the meantime, Hannah continued to bombard me with tearful rants about how I could do this to her, how I was ruining her career, and all of the reasons why she thought I was betraying her. I eventually turned off my phone and blocked any new numbers from reaching me. Once I'd settled into my hotel, I learned that Chloe's initial outburst had attracted a lot of attention. Someone had posted a detailed account of what happened, including the part where I mentioned Hannah and Tom and how they were likely spending the weekend together in Vancouver. The post stirred up quite a bit of drama in the county's political circles and at the courthouse. For the rest of the week, I stayed away from the news about Vancouver, trying to keep my distance from the mess. It wasn't until Friday that I received a letter, a rather unexpected one. It came from Margaret, the senior manager at the DA's office. She apologized for everything that had happened and admitted that while she knew Tom had been seeing 2 women outside the office, she had no idea about Hannah's involvement. She even praised me for using the law to take my revenge on Tom, calling it a clever move. Margaret mentioned that it had been a chaotic week at the DA's office. Tom had been in trying to spin the situation, claiming that my daughter's rebellion was caused by me, her unfaithful husband. Then, on Thursday, Hannah was served with divorce papers on the grounds of adultery. The envelope contained photographs, DVDs, and a letter from me. Margaret said that when Hannah read my letter, she screamed in horror. Both Margaret and 2 other people rushed into her office, where they found Hannah in shock, with photographs scattered on the table. In my letter, I made it clear that I wasn't having an affair, but wanted Hannah to finally understand how I felt. I told her I couldn't stay married to someone I didn't trust, especially now that I knew she had been unfaithful for so long. There was little activity at the DA's office on Thursday after that, and it seemed like things were only just beginning to unravel. The following day, Margaret was in Tom's office for a meeting when 4 men in suits unexpectedly walked in. Tom, already irritated by the interruption, shouted at them, demanding to know why they were disturbing an important discussion. One of the men calmly informed him that he was under arrest. Tom was in complete shock as they handcuffed him and escorted him out of the office. They didn't waste any time. Tom was led straight out the front door of the courthouse, where reporters had somehow been tipped off and were waiting for him. I owe Gary a few beers for that. In the closing part of her letter, Margaret apologized for allowing such a scene to unfold in her office. She also offered her assistance, saying I should reach out if I needed anything, as I didn't deserve to be treated that way. I suspect part of her message was aimed at damage control, but overall, I believe Margaret remained the moral and professional person I always thought she was. My plans for a quiet divorce, however, were completely derailed by my impulsive stunt with Chloe at the restaurant. The arrest quickly became news in Vancouver. As I had told Hannah, this story had all the elements of a summer romance: sex, betrayal, revenge, and too much anger. The media devoured it, and the story was picked up by every 24-hour news outlet. I managed to avoid the worst of it by staying out of town. I'd booked a second hotel room, 10 miles away from my scheduled accommodations, which kept reporters from tracking me down. However, I still saw on TV that they were camped out in front of my house, trying to catch a glimpse of me. Hannah didn't step outside, so they only filmed my relatives coming in and out. The media had it the worst with Emily. As the daughter who had betrayed her father, she found herself constantly hounded by reporters. They followed her to class, and for the first few days, it was easy for the media to catch her. Eventually, the school intervened and forced the reporters off campus, as they were disturbing the students. To add to the chaos, 2 women who had children with Tom came forward to get their moment of fame. Emily, having completed her final exams, managed to slip off campus and head to the airport without being spotted. The media were disappointed but not entirely surprised when she didn't show up for the graduation ceremony. After a while, the story became background noise, a side issue that simmered on the edges of the news cycle. It flared up again when Tom's trial began, but Tom pleaded guilty to multiple charges, leading to a swift resolution. His guilty plea spared Emily and me from having to testify. The case eventually disappeared from the headlines, and with it, Emily, Hannah, and I were also left out of the public eye. Strangely enough, after all the media frenzy, my divorce proceedings went surprisingly quickly and without much fuss. Hannah signed the papers just 4 days after receiving them. I later received a letter from her apologizing for everything, what she did to me, to us. She said she was furious when she came back from Vancouver and swore that she would never forgive me for what I had done. However, the realization that she had been the one who was unfaithful made her see just how hypocritical she had been. In the end, she accepted my offer of a $5,050 settlement and requested that, once things calmed down, we meet so she could apologize in person. She ended the letter, saying she would always love me and wish me well. Later, I learned from her mother that Hannah had quit her job and moved to the Midwest to live with her aunt. Ironically, finding out about Tom did wonders for my career. The FBI gave me full credit for analyzing Tom's tapes, especially since I was hiding from the media at the time. I became even more thorough in my work in Austin, uncovering not only the embezzler they had been hunting, but also another individual who at that point had not even been on their radar. My firm promoted me and put me in charge of the white-collar crime team. Of course, some joker dubbed the team Daniel's Heroes, but the best part? They assigned me a new assistant, a recent college graduate eager to gain experience in forensic accounting. I'd never been so happy to work late. And yes, that bikini looked even better on the floor of my hotel room. And so, that was the end of Daniel's story: betrayal, revenge, and justice. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.